This episode may contain spoilers, sensitive topics, and us laughing at our own jokes. So don't say we didn't warn you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of That's What We Read, a bookcast. I'm Willow, and Rocio is here with me, well, virtually.
Yeah, we can do that together.
We're not together. Rocio, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited to start talking about this book and upcoming books as we move through this podcast.
Talk about your favorite book in the whole wide world.
I gotta say, I think this definitely makes the list, but I would have to say this book that we're going to talk about makes my favorites list, but all the way at the bottom. And it doesn't include all the books I'm still going to read. Today's episode, we're going to talk about The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Before we get into the skim, Rocio, you have a couple of things for us? Yeah, just a quick little details about this book, this beautiful book. It was written by, what Willow said, J.D. Salinger, which however you want to pronounce it. It was written in 1951. It's a total of 26 chapters. Quick little note, I feel like this could have been written in less chapters, less pages, but I'm not a writer, so...
What do we know?
What do we know? And then another quick thing, just to make note of the trigger warnings for this book specifically. There will be discussion about mental health, specifically depression, suicide, sexual harassment as well. And another quick note, from this moment on, we will be talking in depth about Catcher in the Rye. So if you haven't read the book, or if you plan on reading the book, you probably shouldn't listen to this because there will be a lot of spoilers as we move forward.
Yeah, we're just going to do a blanket spoiler alert for our entire series, because there won't be an episode where we don't talk about the actual plot. So if we announce the episode and we tell you which book we're going to talk about, if you have not read the book and you really want to, don't listen. But the minute you read it, please come back and listen. All right, so let's move into... first let me do a quick summary. I pieced this together from a lot of online summaries. You would think after reading the book that I would have had an easier time writing it, but I really couldn't. So, quick summary. Holden Caulfield recounts the few days he spent in New York after being expelled from school to avoid arriving home before Christmas when his break begins. That is the most general we can get. Like bare bones. But Rocio, can you read those couple of excerpts from the book, because we want to make another announcement for this book. Rocio and I, after reading, found out that we missed a major part of the plot of this book, and we want to make sure that we address that. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this book is very much a recap or a retelling of the experience of Holden, and it's told from his perspective at a mental health facility. And we piece those two things together based on two key points. One on the first page that says, I'm not going to tell you my whole goddamn autobiography or anything. I'll just tell you about this madman stuff that happened to me around last Christmas, just before I got pretty run down and had to come out here and take it easy. So, and then it goes on to say that his brother, DB, is close to him in Hollywood and comes to visit him every weekend. So at that point, we don't know where like that place is, and why his brother is visiting him every weekend. But then, if you read all the book, or just skip to the last page, or last two pages, he goes on to say, I could probably tell you what I did after I went home, and how I got sick and all, and what school I'm supposed to go to next fall, after I get out of here. But I don't feel like it. I really don't. And then he continues on to say, a lot of people, especially this one psychoanalyst guy they have here, keeps asking me if I'm going to apply myself when I go back to school next September. So that's a big hint, again, that he is in a mental health facility currently right now.
And somehow we missed all of those.
Yep.
We're realizing, like, right before we started recording, that he said it multiple times, because when we were reading, we had to like look up shout out to Spark Notes for holding it down for me and Rocio since high school. We had to look up some of the kind of major plot points, and the first thing they said was he was retelling the story from some sort of institution, and we both went, huh? No, he's not. And we missed it. And when I tell you I had no clue that this was a recollection and that this was not in real time, because the tone is very informal, very conversational. But we just wanted to put that out there, so that whether you read it or not, just keep that in mind, that this is not in real time. These things have already happened, and he's telling us a story of what happened, just in case you missed him actually saying, I'm telling you what already happened, like we did. Yep. So there's that. Let's move right into our works cited. So, well, let's actually talk about, Rocio, let's talk about the time of that the book is set in and the author. So a quick note on J.D. Salinger. There is a biography written about him called Salinger, and it claims that he wrote the book to channel the trauma he witnessed during the war, meaning World War II. I've seen a couple accounts of that. A lot of people were saying that he was very traumatized and shaken up by the events of the war, and rightfully so. And this was his way to channel that without writing a book specifically about World War II and his trauma. I don't know if he ever said that, but that's just what everyone else is saying. And yeah, I mean, this was right after the war. So this was written, 10 years after the attack on Pearl Harbor, and World War II ended in 1945. So you have 6 years of a period in which he was just like kind of living in this trauma. And then you have from 1947 for, I don't even know how long the Cold War lasted, but that is another thing that happened. So the book is also set during that period. So I would imagine, that there is a lot of trauma going on. And the country was different from what we know now. So there was, just everything looked different, sounded different. People talked in a different way. And currently we're not in the middle of a world war. Well,
you were close last year, but
I mean, yeah. So yeah, that's a little bit of context about the time period and the author himself. Rocio, you want to talk a little bit more after, I don't even know plot-wise where we are in the book, maybe the roommate and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so we can talk more about his time right before he leaves to New York, because right after he randomly leaves his professor's house and just runs back to his dorm, there's a lot of key events or moments that are, I guess, important. We still don't really know the significance to the book, but they're important. But again, like we said, he did get kicked out of multiple schools. He's actually gets in a fight with his roommate, or not a fight. I think, Willow, we talked about how it's mostly his roommate Straddler punching him. Yeah, not much of a fight because basically what had happened was our favorite term, Rocio, in summary. Holden was basically talking shit, and his roommate Stradler was like, stop doing it. And Holden was like, no, and he just kept going at him, and then he punched him in the face. I think a couple of times, like while he was on the ground too. So he ends up going unconscious for I don't know how long actually, but he wakes up and then goes to check in the mirror, and he's definitely has blood running. So it's very graphic in that way. And then the reason for the fight, I don't know if we want to go too much into it, is that Stradler goes on a date with a person that Holland is very fond of.
Oh, right.
Forgot her name, but he
is it it's not Jane,
Jenny,
is it?
Or maybe it is Jane or Jenny, or maybe it's a different name. But the point is that he is very close to this person, and he knows Stradler. I still don't know how to say his name. And he knows that he is the type of person that will not stop a situation. This is like his first reference to potential sexual harassment, of like, guys in this era don't really necessarily listen to a woman when they say no. They just keep going. And he doesn't consider himself that way. And he actually talks about how the reason he hasn't had sex at that age is because he knows to stop when a woman says no, and compared to his like other male counterparts at that time, I guess, which is really sad.
Well, I was like, Holden, snaps for
having some basic
knowledge of consent. And we should also say that Jane is someone, because she comes back up later in the book, right? Is this the one that he actually does go out with, or
no? This is a different person.
Okay, see, I clearly didn't read the book. So Jane is someone that you can tell that he is into her in some way because of the way that he speaks about her. He tries to kind of brush it off as if they're just friends, but he lists all these things about her that Stradler doesn't know. I think it was something about her playing checkers and something about her mom. Like, he listed very specific details, and he was upset that Stradler was just taking her out on a date. And then, like Rocio said, he just kept going on about what kind of guy he is, and how he knows what he's gonna try to do with her, and
And the reason, we can also talk more about why this person is so important to him, or the significance of this person, because we haven't said this, but Holland does have a brother who passes away due to cancer, and he brings this up very briefly at the beginning, because he's writing a poem. So English is the only class he is not failing, so he writes the homework for his roommate and talks about a poem regarding the mitt, or like baseball mitt, from his brother who passed away. And this mitt is very important to him because his younger brother used to write all his poems on there, I believe, and the only person that he showed that mitt to was Jane. So him showing her the mitt shows how important she is to him, and we can see why he got so upset that this roommate was just taking her on a date for like funsies and not necessarily as a serious on a serious note.
This brings us to a very interesting part of the book, or just like a kind of a theme that runs throughout this book, which is the writing style of the book and how Holden talks. But before I talk about that, I want to say that in connection to him talking about his brother, although he only brings that up once, the actual death once, I think he brings up his brother, Ollie, like several times, right? But he mentions throughout the book several times that he's lonely, that he's depressed, that he kind of feels like an outsider, right? Like he's a young guy, but he has this like keen awareness of certain people. Like he calls adults phonies. That's his favorite word. And he seems to be fond of the innocence that children have. And he doesn't also seem very fond of people his own age either.
No.
So, yeah, he talks a lot about things making him lonely, things making him depressed, and that will lead him into a tangent. Now, I have no problem with that because, Rocio, as you know, it doesn't take much for me to get off on a tangent. So I get it. I guess I just don't want to read about it. Because my mind already works like that. And so for him to be like, I just can't believe that Stradler punched me in the mouth. So I sat down and thought about it. And one thing about chairs is that, and then he just goes
to a different topic.
He's like, and there's just one time that I saw this guy in a chair store, and he was such a phony. And he goes and tells you this whole 4-page story. And that's kind of it. We never, like, that it doesn't have anything to do with anything. He just
circle back.
There's no circling back. There's no piggybacking off his own thing. He just is talking.
Yeah. And I think we either read somewhere or someone mentioned to us that was kind of the point or the author, he wanted to write the book as someone who was angsty and like had a lot of things going on. So that's why he wrote the book in the way that he wrote it. But like I said, maybe we could have written that book. Not we. His stories. He could have written the book in a shorter amount of pages if he was going to go on so many tangents. Because, like you said, like my mind also works that way. But when I'm reading a book, I hope that the book isn't that way, because then I get lost.
Yeah, you're like, stay on track, please.
Stay on track. I already have to deal with this on my own. But yeah, so that's another important thing to know as well.
Let's talk, Rocio, to speak to the depression in the book, because we are understanding that is a very serious matter, and that's something that people right now deal with, struggle with, live with. If that's something that you're living with and you want help, like if you want a therapist or a psychiatrist or whatever, we just hope that you can do whatever you can to get that help. And we're also understanding that these kinds of things were not regarded in the same way back then. We definitely have a different view or outlook on mental illness now.
Yeah.
Like what we call them, how we study them, cures, medications, therapy. Like therapy has really come into its own in the past couple of years. People are really encouraging therapy, and it's becoming destigmatized, I would say, which is fantastic. But I can imagine that back in the 50s, there were a lot of stigmas around therapy. And even though tons of people were probably struggling with PTSD from all of the wars, I don't know how much attention was paid to it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just become recent that we've actually become more accepting as a society of mental health, and how trauma or daily activities just like carry a lot of stress on our shoulders, and how that impacts our mental health. Like we've always been good about going to the doctor when we have a broken bone or a cold or whatever, but it's been recently that we've actually taken the steps to see a therapist. And even with that, it's not accessible to everyone. That's also something to note, that therapy is expensive, and if you don't have health insurance, or if your health insurance doesn't cover mental health services, you're not going to be able to see those or access those services. So that's also important to note, that even if you do want services, wow, I said services like 5 times in this sentence, but even if you do want to consult with a therapist or a mental health counselor, it might not be in your price range. We still have a long way to go, which sucks, but hopefully we'll get there soon. Yeah,
we're definitely making strides, I would say, but that's a great point that you bring up, because many people would like to, or feel that they need to seek help. And get some service. Now I'm saying services.
Yeah.
I guess I can't use any other word, but there are people who want to see a therapist. They want a psychiatrist, or they know that maybe in their family there's a history of bipolar disorder or whatever it is, but they can't afford to seek out anyone because that's not in their plan, or that's not in their budget, or whatever it is. So like you said, unfortunately we do have a long way to go. I love that we have made the strides that we have right now, but let's keep going.
Yeah, because right now it's just like kind of like a movement to raise awareness, and raising awareness and making actual steps to ensure that people are accessing and having those services available to them is completely different, because you can preach to the choir that yes, mental health is important, but if you don't give them that access, then it's going to go nowhere. So, but back to the book with Holland. He does have...
we went on a tangent.
Yeah, so I was thinking about that too. I was like, we're like complaining about this book going on a tangent, but here we are on topic number 5.
Right.
But yeah, going back to the book, Holland does have, like, it makes sense. His has a lot of history with trauma. With his first I'm guessing is the loss of his brother. And the brother passes away due to cancer at a young age. So he already has a big loss. And I think he's not even 16 or 17. I forgot how old he is. But that in itself causes a lot of stress for him. And that, I believe that's part of the reason that this book is called Catcher in the Rye. They mentioned that he has this idea, or he wants to be a catcher in the rye in the way that he is saving and catching innocence that is lost with adulthood. So he's saving the innocence in children. But he is still so stuck on the idea that he wasn't able to save his brother and his innocence. And now he's not able to save his own innocence as he grows up. So I never heard the term catcher in the rye. So this is my first time actually coming into contact with this phrase. But that's what other people have mentioned, that's what it means. And it has a lot to do with his brother passing away at such a young age.
There's a moment in the book when he is, while he's on his New York escapade, there's a moment when he is walking on the street and he sees two parents and a kid. And I think the kid is walking in the street.
Yeah. Like
very carefree, right? And I think that was one of those moments when he noticed, like, my life and your life are very different. You have this carefree, innocent, just mindset, and I'm somewhat jaded and my mind is tainted and I've experienced all these horrible things. And that's when he brings up Catcher in the Rye. There's a poem or something that's a part of, I think that it was taken from. And I felt like I read in the poem or in an article about the poem that he misquoted the poem, and that the phrase is not Catcher in the Rye. It's something along the lines of that. He didn't quite get it right, but he interpreted it in the way that he wanted to, something like that.
Yeah, his sister Phoebe corrects him I think towards the end. She's like, no, that's not what it is. It's the catcher meets the body by the rye.
Oh, right, so, right.
Again, I can't really analyze what exactly the change in meaning means because I haven't really read the poem. I don't know if it's an actual poem, if it's a poem within this world that J.D. Salinger was creating, but I know that change in wording is very significant for how he then changes his mindset at that point from completely, I guess, failing to save the innocence of children.
And I'll say that, very honestly, I have lost a sibling, so I'm not going to say I know, what he's going through and all that kind of stuff, but I can empathize and I can relate to a degree. And I think, and Rocio and I will get into this later in our final segment, but, I definitely empathize with Holden. I feel bad for him for most of the book, and there were some moments when I thought something was really going to happen plot-wise. Yeah. And there was not much. Like, things were happening in New York. I won't say he was just sitting in a chair for 3 days, but it was like we were leading up to these moments, and then they would fall, and then we would forget about them. And then he would kind of interject with these things about why he's lonely, why he's depressed. He misses his brother. He misses Phoebe, his younger sister. He wishes he had friends. He wishes people weren't phonies. And there were all these things that I was like, I get it. I feel you, Holden, but what are you talking about? There's a moment when, I don't even know where, this might have been close to the end of the book, but Holden meets up with another teacher. Oh, yeah. Mr. Antolini. This was going back to one of our trigger warnings. Before what happened, I think that was a moment of, Holden has met an adult that he likes.
Like a role model.
Like a role model. You could tell that he respected Mr. Antolini because Antolini told him very truthfully, but in a different way than I think the other teacher and anybody else. I guess I can't put it in a better way, but like, what is his deal? Yeah. Because everyone could like point out things that he could fix, or not what was wrong with him, but they could say like, Holden, this is what you need to fix. And Mr. Antolini kind of approached that in a different way, so he had a different kind of respect for Mr. Antolini.
Yeah, I can definitely see that and agree, because they even they go over a letter that one of them wrote. Mr. Antolini gives him advice on extending for a cause, and backtrack a little bit. He somehow ends up at his parents' house with Phoebe. They talk for a bit, and then his parents come home, and he manages to sneak out. But now it's like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. in the morning. He has nowhere to go. So he ends up calling the professor, and he was like, yeah, come over. Like, we'll house you, or you can sleep over. And that in itself is like, okay, like he is there to like have his back and like, I guess, give him a shelter and whatever. But then the night progresses into him. Once he like actually is settled in, he has the, what's it called? The sofa. Mm-hmm. He gets to sleep in the sofa. He's like dozing off. At one point he wakes up and Mr. Antonelli is like caressing his forehead. Mm-hmm. And that triggers a lot for him. Or he discusses how he was upset because he's experienced that kind of behavior that's led to more, which kind of hints at potential sexual harassment that he's experienced in the past. He doesn't explicitly say, but he does mention that that behavior has happened before, or that other men have done that to him. It doesn't go further than that because Holden gets up. Again, he's very triggered, so he reacts very fast and puts on his clothes. He's like, no, like, I'd rather leave. I actually forgot he like makes up an excuse to leave the house, which makes sense because mm-hmm. if I woke up and someone's just touching my forehead for no reason, that would be...
Yeah, it's weird. It's very strange.
Yeah, very weird and alarming. So he ends up escaping, which is good. But that was a really weird scene, I could say. But I think it was... One of the purposes was to, like, potentially hint at him experience sexual harassment or sexual assaults early in his life.
I mean, all in all, I think that we can see that mm-hmm. Holden is a very traumatized young man, right? Like a lot has happened to him mm-hmm. at a young age. And I don't know, I guess at the core, maybe you and I were looking for him, and we're sorry. Maybe we were looking for him to like get into that a little bit more. Yeah. It just seemed like and not necessarily the part with Mr. Antonelli, like that's, you know, not that we wanted him to talk about it more, but I guess the fact that we knew he lost his brother, and that didn't really, it only ever came back up again when he said, I miss him, or when he would bring up a memory between the two, or of the two of them. So it felt a lot like his memories and his sense of isolation and his depression and all that were unrelated to the plot of the book. Yeah. So I wouldn't say it takes a lot to connect the dots. I think you can connect the dots, but I think I started to dislike Holden early on in the book before I understood why he was acting the way he was. Like, there's mm-hmm. a lot of behaviors that are annoying. And again, let me also say that I am now a 24-year-old woman. This is told from a 16-year-old perspective. So, like, obviously, that might be... I'm not used to that perspective anymore. I was there at one point in my life, and I'm pretty sure I was also annoying. But now, reading that, now it's completely different. So, it was definitely... I was annoyed way earlier than I should have been if, like, his character was built earlier on. That was very redundant, but I think you get the point. Yeah, I mean, there was that moment right when we had gotten through maybe chapter 6 or 7 or whatever. It was very early on in the book, and I texted you and I said, what do you think of the book? And you were like, I'm not loving it. And I was like, okay, I'm so glad you said that, because I am having a hard time staying interested. I don't mm-hmm. really care about what's happening. He's just mm-hmm. telling me about what's happening in his day, and I'm like, I don't care that you took a lot of taxis. He took a lot of taxis. So let's mention some of the stuff that he did while he was in New York. He spent, I think, 3 days in New York before he went home, and he took many taxis, taxis. A train and a lot of taxis. Right, and there was that train part. I keep wanting to say scene. It's not a play. There was the part in early on when he took the train. This might have been on his way to New York, and he saw the mom of someone who went to the school, mm-hmm. who he didn't like, but he faked like he did, because I think at some point she must have mentioned, my son or whatever. And he was like, yeah, he's a great guy. We love him. And then he was like, just kidding. I actually hate this guy. And then he invited the mom to go to drinks with him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Actually, before can we talk about why? Because I feel like we said that we found him annoying, but we haven't talked about why we found him annoying. So people are probably like, why do you hate this person that's gone through so much?
Okay. Yeah.
Basically, what we find annoying about Holden is that he calls everybody phonies. We talked about this already. He calls everybody phonies. He goes on and like the first pages, he's like, I hate when people repeat themselves. And then he goes on for the rest of the 200 pages repeating everything he says. Which I get, like, fine, repeat yourself, but don't say you hate it and then do it.
Yeah.
And then he also is just, he has this tendency, and I don't know if this is linked to his current mental state, but a tendency where he, like, gets really, I think it is, he gets really, like, excited and makes, like, there's a scene where he'll be like, let's run away, let's get a car and run away. And then telling this person, but then in his subconscious telling us, he's like, I didn't even mean it. Like, I wouldn't go. Like, that's crazy. I'm saying these things, but I don't mean it.
He's very impulsive, which I mean, if you had dropped me off in New York City, 16 years old, and just said, just 3 days, just do whatever you want. I mean, I guess I'm going to find something to do, I don't know that I would have done half of what he did, but he is very impulsive. He does let his excitement kind of get the best of him, because there was a moment, remember that part when he was in the bar, well, the final bar, and that guy met him there. And he was like, oh, is this the same old Holden? Like, slow down, because Holden kept asking him about his sex life or something. And the guy was like, can you stop it? Yeah. But he just got so excited to be like, do you like her? Are you going to marry her? How's the sex? And the guy was like, I just got here. Yeah.
So those are just a couple things as to why we found this character less likable.
Yeah. And let's also say, it's like so many qualifiers here. Let's also say that Holden, although he alludes to the fact that he's in a place, he's in a center, it's not explicitly said, I have been diagnosed with anything, right? So we're kind of putting that on him, that he may have PTSD or he may be depressed, which, like, we're not professionals. So we don't want to, like, push that diagnosis upon him, but that's kind of the step that we took to be like, well, maybe, I guess, using our psych course, textbook knowledge, we were like, oh, he meets all the criteria for it, right? So it's never explicitly said if he has something and if he does what he is living with. Yeah. Took a little break and we're back. No, we're back. We were talking about, Rocio, some of the stuff that had happened to him in New York. Yeah. There was a part when he went to the bar or the club or wherever he was, and he saw those women, and he kept calling one of them ugly. And he was like, I don't want to dance with her because she's ugly. I was like,
but then he dances with her.
And then he danced with her, and he was like, well, she's a good dancer. And I was like, can you not... Can you? Do you have to be beautiful to be?
Can only be beautiful.
Do you have to be attractive in Holden's eyes to be a good dancer?
Maybe. Oh my gosh. Yes, I remember that. That scene was, again, there's a lot of scenes where I don't understand the point or the purpose for the main overall theme of this book, but that was a scene that I don't know why. But anyways.
Then there was the one within the hotel. He met Maurice. Right. And the prostitute, which I'm sure that was the term used back then. I'm sure many people still say that. But for the sake of bringing that term to modern day, we will say he met a sex worker in the elevator along with this... I'm going to call him weird. He just was a strange man to me. Yeah. Maurice in the elevator. And the woman came to his room and... thought he was looking for a good time. Okay. I think Holden also thought he was looking for a good time. And then when he got close to the good time, he was like, never mind. Yeah. I don't want to do it. And then there was something, I still don't know what the money situation was. Like,
Yeah.
did he not pay her enough, or did they really like get over on him on the amount?
So, yeah, the money situation is weird because in the elevator, the guy says like $15 for the night or from this time to this time. It was like a weird rate. And then, like you were saying, Willow, like he is ready for this, but then once it actually comes to do the down and dirty, I guess, he is like, no.
The down and dirty.
He's like, no, I don't want to do this. Like, I'll still pay you. I no longer want to do this. And he switches from putting the blame on her to them putting the blame on himself. He like calls this like idea of like having, or like, I don't know how he ended up saying that the sex worker made him depressed, but that's basically his whole attitude to everyone. Like, everyone makes him depressed because of something that they're doing. But then he made a point that was the reason he didn't want to have sex with her. So he basically said like, here, like, take the money. I don't want to do this anymore. Fair. Like, you're still paying because, you know, like, you asked for this and this person has put time on her schedule. But then Maurice comes back. I think it's either a couple hours later or the next day, and it's like, hey, you owe me money. You didn't pay the full amount. And I think it was like $5 more that he was missing, according to Maurice. And the bodyguard seems reasonable, where he's like, all right, like, or Maurice is like, let me get the wallet. He sees the wallet, takes the money. And then the bodyguard's like, all right, we got the money, let's go. Because he was trying to avoid Maurice, I guess, getting in a fight or hurting Holden. But at the end of the day, Maurice still ends up like punching him, or I don't know, I forget to what extent he ends up hurting him, but he does physically assault him before he leaves. And
I think we're both still unclear about if Maurice actually was like taking advantage of him financially, because I like he told him the price in the elevator. And then Holden, I can't remember, because there was a thing where she was like, no, you owe me this. And he was like, no, Maurice said this. And she was like, no, the price is this. And they kind of went back and forth. And then, you know, that's what happened. And go ahead.
Quick note on that. I don't know if you were going to say this, but every time he is hurt or drunk, he pretends that he has been shot. So he makes... When he's by himself, he pretends he's shot, so he does like a behavior like can't walk, or like he's holding the wound. And when he gets super drunk at a bar, or the last bar he visits, he then pretends that he's been shot, but he doesn't want everybody to know. So it's multiple times that he pretends that this has happened to him. And I don't know where that stems from, but that's also important to note.
He also is drunk quite often in this book. He drinks a lot, he smokes a lot. He goes to these 2 bars and is upset when the bartenders or waitstaff don't give him drinks. There is one that he was like, they don't care. But then the other one, the waiter or waitress was like, yeah, we're not going to serve you. I'm not going to give you a, you know, whatever. What do you want, like a scotch or something? And they were like, I'm not giving that to you. And he was upset about that. So I will say, this is another funny part about Rocio and I talking about the book. The part when I first noticed when he was pretending to be shot, I thought he had actually been shot. And so I remember texting you and I was like, did someone shoot him? And you were like, no, I think he's just pretending. And I was like, okay, because I fully thought that I blacked out for a couple of pages, which I probably did still. But there was a part when I was like, did someone actually shoot him? And I missed, because that would have been a major, you know, plot point. Yeah. But I don't think anybody actually shot him. He just...
pretends.
He was pretending. I will say that there was a very sweet part of the book. Remember the part when he was kind of reminiscing about Jane? When he was telling us, I guess, like how he met her and how he knew her parents, and that time when he was in her backyard and then they were gonna kiss or have sex and then they didn't. So she comes back up, which is great, because you can tell that he really adores Jane and adores his sister Phoebe. He has people that he really loves and cares for. You know, his brother that passed away, Ali. I think he likes his older brother DB, but he calls him a what does he say? Something about Hollywood, and calls him a prostitute, right? Yeah. Right. And it doesn't seem that he's very close with his parents, but he seems like he has a nice relationship with his siblings. And then he loves Jane. And I believe this was the part when, I think I'm still blanking. I think because he talks about Jane, but who is the woman that he goes on a date with and was like, let's go run away?
I want to say Sophie. I don't know why. But
is that her name?
Completely wrong.
This is probably the part of the book when I just was flipping pages. Like, I don't even know if I was really reading.
Oh, Sally.
Sally
Hayes.
Sorry, Sally. We forgot about your name. Sally is the girl that he goes on a date with. Although he keeps trying to make it seem like it's not a date.
Yeah. And then he calls her drunk later on.
Oh,
looking for
right.
her. Like I said, a roller coaster of emotions and events with this one character.
So, I think that we've pretty much hit everything that we wanted to as it comes to the plot and the story, how it exists. I don't know about it progressing, but how it exists. The one final thing I'll say about just in this segment is the link to pop culture. I don't know why I said popular, like an old person. I read briefly that The Catcher in the Rye has been linked to assassinations or assassination attempts. Yeah. And that, what's his name? The person who assassinated John Lennon, Mark David Chapman, when they arrested him, he was holding a copy of the book. And in it, he wrote, "To Holden Caulfield, from Holden Caulfield." And then there was another string of conspiracies where this was like linked to JFK's assassination, and people were trying to say that all of these assassins, is that the word? Sounds like a video game word. All of the people who killed these people were somehow they had read the book, or they were, they somehow empathized with Holden, or they felt like they were connected to him. It's a very I don't know that I'd say interesting, but it exists. It's the theory, but I just wanted to bring that up in kind of relation to like current stuff.
Yeah, and I wonder, I don't know how the direct link to the John Lennon and the other assassinations, but I wonder if it's with the theme of like phonies, living in a world of phonies and society expectations and being tired of that and wanting to get rid of that. So again, I don't know much of that pop cultures, but like you said, I don't know if I want to use interesting, but it is very a good thing to know, or not a good thing. Definitely a bad thing to know.
It is a thing to know.
A thing to know. Yes, good job.
It is a thing to know. Well, Rocio, we are moving right now into our last segment, the book report. So go ahead and give us the reviews from Goodreads and Amazon.
Yeah, so Goodreads has an average rating of 3.81 out of 5 stars. And I saw a rating from Jean. I wouldn't say their last name because I don't want to put them on the spot, but I'm pretty sure you can go find it.
Hi, Jean.
Hi, Jean. Thanks for summarizing this pretty good. But they put like what we've said into a good perspective. Like, we obviously don't relate to this book, especially at this time era, but what Jean goes on to say is that we have to consider this book in the context of the era in which it was like written and released. As Willow was mentioning, it was released post-World War II. And readers who were brought up in this era or after the 1960s don't realize like the importance of what happened between the 1950s and 1960s. And today, and right now I'm quoting Jean, by the way, today being a free spirit and expressing your individuality is celebrated and encouraged. But in those dates, you were expected to, as I was told, do as I say, not as I do. And that might sound outrageous and unreasonable, but it was, in fact, exactly what was accepted as a good parenting. And then here we have, one, a main character who curses constantly and unashamedly rejects the values of his parents and society and in general. And two, a narrative style that is casual and conversational. These two factors were shocking and dismaying to some, refreshing and delightful to others. And then Jean goes on to say how Holden is basically a hero to some in this era, because again, he's basically saying what is not at that point acceptable, saying like society sucks, you all are phonies, like we need to do better. Like now we say that very casually, and we know that society sucks, we need to change it, but back then it was definitely not talked about as often. Now moving on to Amazon. The Amazon has a higher rating of 4.5 out of 5, and Frank says something which I can understand, and I kind of relate to, and I will go more into detail when I do my own review. But he says The Catcher in the Rye was one of his favorites when he was 16, and it was his favorite precisely because he was 16. At 16, he found Holden Caulfield's crisis profoundly moving. He admired his searing indictment of society, his acute understanding of human nature, his extraordinary sensitivity, and he puts in parentheses, I mean, come on, he had a nervous breakdown, for God's sake. He had to be sensitive. So, Willow, you want to move on to Library Things and Barnes & Noble?
Yeah, so I'll do Barnes & Noble first because I didn't pick any review from Barnes & Noble, any specific one to read, but Barnes & Noble had a 4.2 out of 5. Library Thing was a 3.8 out of 5, and I wanted to read someone's review from Library Thing. This user's name is Bertel, and this was written on Christmas Day last year. Hey Bertel, love you. So Bertel writes about The Catcher in the Rye, an American classic, and I don't get it. I hope that... All right, let me get this. I'm trying not to laugh. Okay. An American classic, and I don't get it. I hope that doesn't make me a bad person. It's an enjoyable story, but nothing more. A colleague told me it was using narrative methods that made it groundbreaking when it came out, but I guess such things get lost in the mists of time. Edit. I've now learned that I was supposed to be either thrilled, shocked, or annoyed by the rough language in the book. Well, I was not. Again, having English as a second language might have dulled my sensitivity, or it is just that what was shocking 60 years ago is now mainstream, and we have developed new ways of shock and surprise. Edit 2. Oh, and the young protagonist's behavior, also shocking or not? Bertel gave it 3 stars. So, listen, everybody had, this is, we really, woke up and chose controversy because this book is, I mean, I think in some states or schools, it's been eliminated from the canon, right? Because of some of the subject matter, which, the canon should be eliminated itself, whatever, stay on track. But this book, when it comes to people's opinions, it really is split. Some people are like, no, you don't get it. And others, like us, are like, no, you don't get it. So, this is a perfect segue to get into our reviews. So, Rocio, go ahead and tell the people what you think about The Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah, I think kind of like we were saying, you either love it or hate it. I think back then, 16-year-old me in that era maybe would have loved it. Maybe I would have given it a 4 out of 5. But today, in this current society,
in summary,
as a 25-year-old woman, I would give it like a 1, maybe a 2 out of 5. And similar to some of the reviews that were mentioned previously, I think that, like, again, maybe as a teenager, I would have enjoyed it. But that is a hard maybe also. Again, from a personal perspective, the only thing that I think would link me to him would be the teenage years. I'm not rich. I didn't go to boarding school. I obviously also haven't experienced much of the trauma that he's experienced. So that's another thing, but I would have understood, or I would have been able to empathize. Yeah, so I guess going off with this trauma, it's important to mention that he has a traumatic past. He lost his brother to cancer. The author hints to potential sexual assault. And this all leads to him feeling depressed. As he mentions frequently, he has feelings of disappointment with the world. And makes sense. And his character traits are not explored as much, or not developed as much, as we previously mentioned, that it makes you want to or makes you hate him right away before you actually understand his story. And I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it definitely plays a role in how you enjoy the book moving forward. Because at some point you're kind of like, I either want to stop reading this book or I want to like skim through this really fast and say that I read it.
I will say, just I'm gonna slide something in right here because that made me think that, you know, a lot of books and TV, film, I think that a lot of writers will try to make you empathize with the character, make you feel something for them, whatever that emotion is.
Yeah.
And then if they want to, kind of flip it on its head.
Yeah.
And so I think that our best friend JD, what's his name? Jerome. What's his actual name?
Jerome. I forgot about that. Yeah, Jerome.
Jerome. I just think that I wanted to empathize with Holden, not in the final 3 chapters.
Yeah.
If the empathy or the grounds for empathy could have been presented in the first maybe 3 or 4 and really drawn out like they were in the final chapters, I probably would have held on for longer. I probably would have thought, oh, I feel like bad for this kid. Like he's going through a lot. But it didn't seem that we got into his mind until almost the end.
Yeah.
And I seemed to empathize with him more when the book was ending than all of what he said in the beginning.
No, yeah, I agree. There's definitely, it goes a lot with the writing style and how the book was written. Because there's like you said, movies, TV shows where like you like, for some reason, like I'm thinking of You, the series, there was a lot of controversy about how many people liked the main character and he was a serial killer. But that all goes back to how things are written and how the characters develop. So I think for The Catcher in the Rye, I think that's where I think my rating goes lower, because you get annoyed by this character so soon before even knowing his story. And I think that's hard, because that makes a lot of people just put the book down. And then another thing that this book does that I found annoying, or maybe that plays into my reading, is the amount of repetition that goes on in this book when it comes to just repeating like the same sentence or repeating words. Willow and I actually ended up having a game because we had to read this book. We read the last 70 pages together over FaceTime. Because,
and boy, was it a chore. I thought we were never going to finish it.
And maybe that's the reason. Okay, so first of all, we read this on FaceTime. We read the last 70 pages and we decided, like 2 pages in, make it a drinking game. Every time he says phony,
sore,
or
there were like 5 words that we picked. Yeah. We were like, every time take a little sip, and yeah.
Basically, we were drinking or doing a little sip of our drinks every other page.
Yeah.
So if we missed the key point at the last page where he mentions that he is in a mental health facility, maybe that's why. So I guess that's the reason we missed that key point, because we were like 2 or 3 drinks in at that point. Or at least I was. I think you had only.
Yeah, I was fine. I also didn't have much of whatever I was drinking left, and I was like, at some point I'm gonna finish this and I'll be done. Something else I'll also say is that we read aloud for the majority of our 70 pages, which for me, like I personally can't do audiobooks and all that kind of stuff. It just doesn't really work for me. But some of the lapse in memory or like the lack of knowledge, I just wasn't paying attention. Whether I was reading aloud or you were reading aloud, there was just parts when I was like, huh? Who's this? Who are you talking about? The part with Mr. Antolini, we had to go back and I was like, can we back it up here? Because I'm forgetting who the hell Mr. Antolini is. So
in summary, in conclusion, overall, I think, and this is going to be kind of a summary, obviously, if I said that already. I think this book could have been way, way shorter. I think maybe like 130 pages, not 200, and I think it was 75. It was a long book. The plot didn't go anywhere for most of the book. And then as I said before, it doesn't really endure the test of time. And what I mean by that this book makes sense for the 1960s or maybe a couple decades after that. But now in this era of 2021, of like, we are challenging what society has been telling us, and we don't take we take the rules and just follow them. I think it no longer applies to us as a society. And maybe in a different society other than like the US, or maybe in different parts of the US it does make sense, but at least currently here in the time, it doesn't make sense, or it doesn't apply to us as much.
Which goes against directly some of the other points people were making. Like a lot of the positive reviews were saying this book stands the test of time. Like it will always be a classic. I would have to disagree. For me, myself, personally, it is not a classic. It is a classic bore, but I would say it's not like I would never come back to this book. There was some that I remember reading in high school that may have been considered classics that I would probably go back to. Before we recorded, we were talking about Great Gatsby. Like I would come back to that book. I loved it. Yeah. Frankenstein would definitely come back to it. This, I would rather burn it, but here we are. So I'm with you, Rocio. I would also have probably given this a 4 in middle school or high school, because I was definitely angsty. I mean, we all were. An angsty teen, middle school, high school, right? So I think I probably would have felt more of a connection to Holden. Even with all his little quirks and idiosyncrasies, like I definitely would have related more. Now, I don't really care. And let's also say, want to bring this in because that's part of, and you would have heard this in our trailer, but our reason for naming this podcast, That's What We Read, is not only because of a That's What She Said joke, right? The play on words, but we want to make sure that we're addressing these books, our opinions about these books through our identities. And so both of us as people of color, reading a book about a young, angsty white boy walking around New York with a bunch of money and smoking and drinking his way until Christmas break, we're like, like there are some parts when I was like, Holden, you got me. You really got me, dude. And then you lost me. Again, disregarding any sort of like mental things that he's living with, mental illnesses or whatever. Like I'm taking that into account, but at the same time, not, because I know that part of the reason why he acts the way he, or the way that he is because of that, largely. So, but just coming from a standpoint of who he is and what he's doing, I'm like, I don't really relate to any of that. So yeah, I'd probably give it a 2. I'm not gonna give it a 1 because it is not the worst thing I've read before. I'm in close second.
But it's close.
Yeah, like close.
Oh, okay.
Let me start with the pros. Overall, let me just read my notes verbatim. Overall, I don't think this book is trying to be anything or even do anything. What I mean by that is, I don't know if our buddy Jerome was trying to do anything with this book.
Sorry, we just recently found out that his name, the J in his name, sorry, for Jerome. So every time Willow mentions it, it just.
I think about Lizzo. I think about
shock.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lizzo, we love you.
Yeah.
I said I'm not sure how high school English teachers break this down, but I'd be curious to witness how this is taught and discussed in schools. I will say I'm glad that I didn't read this in high school. I really don't know if I could have gotten through this. Sorry. Maybe I don't know if he has any other books, but this ain't it. I don't even want this on my show. So thank you all for listening. We will be back next month on the 5th, April 5th, to talk about Winter in the Blood.
Yes.
By James Welch. On the Pop Sugar list, we checked off this criteria was read a book that everyone else has read but you, something like that. Yes. We both had this, and so we read that. And then for Winter in the Blood, we checked off the box for read a book written by an Indigenous author. So thank you for listening. Please stay tuned on our social media so you can engage. We're going to be asking you all what you thought about the book if you've read it, or what you thought about the episode. If you have any suggestions, if you want to write in, if you want to sit in on an episode at some point, we'd love to have some people kind of weigh in on some future books. So we'll definitely keep a list of that. For now, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at We Read Bookcast, and you can email us at WeReadBookPod. Those things will all be on our social media accounts. We're going to have that on our YouTube, which is just the title of our podcast, if you want to type that in. And subscribe, please, and we'll have all of our episodes on there with captions and all of that. So we will be back next month. Thanks for listening.